Join the Salty Dog and his captain, Ted Yoho. Search for the Ward Scott Files on Facebook, Vimeo, and over 30 audio platforms, including Apple and Spotify. Now here's your host, the Salty Dog, John Martin.
Well, good morning. Welcome to our Political Pirate Podcast, as we call it, the Three Ps, here with yours truly, the old salty dog, John Martin, and the captain of our pirate ship, none other than Ted Yoho. Good morning, Ted.
Good morning,
How are you?
John. You don't look that salty, buddy. Your hair's a little gray, though. I guess that's a little salty gray.
It's salt and pepper.
It's salt and pepper. Good morning to you.
Absolutely.
I hope your weekend went well, and congratulations on your daughter getting married.
Yeah, my oldest daughter got married yesterday. It's been a bit squirrely for me. I had a week of fishing as well, so I was out of harm's way. I saw no stealth bombers or anything
Nothing
like that.
No UFOs coming
Nothing
out,
like
no drones flying over.
I was in the Gulf of America, not the Persian Gulf, so I guess I was lucky there.
Yeah.
But as we always say, it seems like lately, there's absolutely nothing to talk about, Ted.
Nothing. I just shut down. Go fishing.
But you brought this up earlier in a conversation about the unfortunate death of the legendary Beach Boy Brian Wilson, and you reminded me of what Mr. McCain was singing, a version of and he said bomb, 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 bomb Iran. Well, I guess he was a little early for that, but it has happened now.
It has happened. And there's going to be a lot of discussion about that, and I look forward to going into that. And it's not, we do have plenty to talk about today, and this is going to be interesting.
So let me just
But before you go forward,
ahead.
Remember, our goal is to educate, motivate, and activate our listeners. So this is going to be a great show, as they all are. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me just start with this. Because I literally found out about it because I was offshore, and I didn't really find out about it till Sunday morning when I came in. So it was much more, I won't say shocked, because I knew this was going to happen at some point. Whether it was going to happen Saturday, I didn't know. But when you got the initial reports coming in, what was your first thoughts?
It was mixed. One, I'm like, here we go. We're going into the Middle East again. But then when you look at the history, when the Ayatollahs took over, the theological regimes took over back in the 70s, they have been nothing but death to America. They're a state sponsor of terror, which is the worst you can get to do the whole country. They're the ones that have been putting the IEDs that were in Afghanistan and Iraq, killing our soldiers, supporting the Houthis and the other terrorist groups in Yemen and in Palestine, Hamas. And so they've been doing this since the 70s. And they keep saying, we're going to obliterate Israel from the river to the sea, and we're going to annihilate America. And they have gotten so close to a nuclear bomb that when do you wait? How long do you wait? And when do you take them seriously? And I think, it's a tough decision, and there's going to be a lot of fallout from this. And that's the thing I'd like to talk more about as we go on in the show.
Well, you mentioned that they were potentially building a nuclear weapon, but I would not be totally shocked, Ted, if it came out somewhere down the line that they actually had finished one. It would not shock me.
It wouldn't shock me either. The one thing you can't do is trust Iran. When I was in Congress, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, to prevent them from getting the nuclear bomb that Obama and John Kerry negotiated, it never prevented them from getting it, and never blocked them from creating ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they could enrich, and they kept enriching. And it's interesting because they said their uranium enrichment program was only for peaceful electrification of their country, which I find strange because they're a big oil producer. So you could use, those dirty fossil fuels, but to create uranium, enrich uranium for electricity, you only need at the maximum 20%, but most of them, if you use low water or light water reactors, you only need 3 to 5% enriched uranium. They're at 90%. And so that tells you what their ultimate goal was. The other thing is you don't need an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, to deliver a nuclear bomb. You could bring a freighter over here off the coast of one of our big cities that has a nuclear bomb in there and do tremendous damage. And so this is something that's going to play out in the future. And then, as one of the first tags we have here, President Medvedev of Russia, ex-president, he says that there's a bunch of nations that are willing to give Iran nuclear weapons now. I mean, that's a comforting thought, right?
Absolutely, absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, when I saw when you kind of gave me that in an email to me to talk about, and this, you hear all kind of different things on the news, and like you said, we need to educate and motivate and activate people. So I'm hoping people will get a slightly different take sometimes, or maybe facts that they didn't get somewhere else. But I'm just going to give you my opinion on that. I wonder if what Medvedev said is true, or is it just a bluster? Because the thing is, I'm not convinced. See, people don't really understand this sometimes. Do I think China and Russia both want to dominate the world? Yes, I do.
Absolutely.
I think without question. But I don't think they want to dominate an apocalyptic world.
No.
In other words, I don't really think Russia is interested in a worldwide nuclear war, because they're not. But in the Iranians are a different situation. When you talk about the mullahs, they are waiting on the 72 virgins.
Yeah, they have martyrdom.
Right, and part of their belief system of their sect of Islam believes
Shia.
In the apocalypse idea, because it is destiny for them to do that.
It is destiny.
So to me, it's different in that sense. Do I think that Russia doesn't have our best interests at heart? Of course they don't. But I don't see them wanting an apocalypse. And with China, as we talked a little bit about,
Right.
I think on Friday's show, the way I see it, Ted, is they want to dominate the world. They want to prevent us and lower our footprint on the world. But they desperately want to keep us shopping.
Oh, they
because
definitely
we're
want to
paying
do that.
for it. So
they do.
I'm not sure it's in their best interest to actually have a nuclear confrontation. You see what I'm saying?
No, I agree with you 100%. And this is where negotiation and diplomacy is so important. If Xi Jinping and the Communist Party work with Russia and say, hey, listen, we need to temper this down. Nobody's going to give Iran a nuclear bomb. Now you got to worry about North Korea, who listens to nobody. And we're going to talk about them a little bit later. But, they're thinking, well, if the U.S. preemptively struck on Iran, I've been saying death to America. We're going to annihilate them. They're the great Satan out there, as Iran says, and we're going to bomb them. So he's thinking, how long do I wait before they bomb me? Do I need to bomb first? And again, he doesn't care about international trade, because he doesn't produce anything that we buy, whereas China does. So it's going to be an interesting chess game that you've got 5 people playing the same chessboard at the same time, and it's going to be complicated. And let's just hope that our leadership really changes the course of this.
Well, it's you talk about North Korea, and rightfully so. The whole Korean Peninsula, to me, is one, and people don't talk about it that much, but it's one of the most fascinating places on Earth when you think about it. If you look at that satellite map,
Right.
where you have literally the northern part of Korea at night is black. There's very little electricity.
Right.
And South Korea is like one of the most lit up places on the planet because of all they do. And they're literally the same people butted up against each other. It's just amazing that North Korea can even hold on to power when they see the difference between the two Koreas. It's always just fascinating.
It really is, and the continent's dark, and their people are dark as far as getting information from the outside world. That was one of the good things about Radio Free America, but it was being run wrong because it had a progressive slant to it that was kind of anti-American. And so I think it was something that they needed to remove, and he did. Maybe it'll come back in a better way, a more patriotic way, and just speak in truth about what liberty and freedom is about.
Yeah. One more thing, and we'll come back to North Korea in a minute, but one of the stats I saw this several years ago, that they were having a run on North Korean soldiers fleeing and being captured. And the average weight of a North Korean soldier was less than 100 pounds.
Right.
Because they can't eat. They're not
They can't eat. They can't eat. And then they're heavily parasitized. I mean, this is the 21st century. And for people in a country to be parasitized, I mean, that's something we got rid of with chewing tobacco back in the 1800s for the most part, in the modern medicines we have today. And dare I say this, ivermectins is something that's been given to over 5 billion people around the world in developing countries to deworm them.
See, that's why we have a vet, and I'm talking
right.
about as a veterinarian, because I don't even know if I can say parasiticide. But getting back to this story specifically, you talked about the Russia threat from Medvedev about arming them with nuclear weapons. Well, Iran voted yesterday, I guess whatever their legislative body, to close the Straits of Hormuz, which is a huge exporter of oil. But the interesting thing about that is it's mostly exporting oil from them.
Right.
And China gets a lot of their oil from there. The United States really doesn't get a lot of oil from there. So I see why they voted for it, but is
Sure.
it actually, first, can they do it? And secondly, would they do it? Because in some ways it might be the death knell for them.
It could be. Yes. Will they try? Absolutely, they'll try. 20% of the world's oil goes through the Straits of Hormuz. And, you've got Saudi Arabia, you got Yemen, you got the UAE and Qatar. They come through there. And they can do it by putting mines in that area.
So they mined it in the past.
They
right?
can sink boats in the shallower areas. It's a very narrow strait. I don't know the exact width across that. But that's something they can do. And the other thing is they'll have their Navy out there. You know how they humiliated our Navy? And they had our Navy on the deck of their boat,
like this,
on their knees and their heads down. And John Kerry says, he apologized for us being over there. Which, I mean, that whole Biden, Harris, John Kerry, Obama. I mean, they were so bad for America, and they have weakened us around the world. And thank God we got President Trump there that's playing a strong hand, a hand that needs to be played today in this world.
Well, when you mentioned that about the mining and all and what they did
Right.
under Obama, also because I was having a conversation with someone at the wedding that I attended yesterday.
You didn't bring up politics. Out
No,
of the
they
wedding.
brought it up, but I'm smarter than that. I may not be the smartest guy, but I ain't as dumb as I look. But they were talking about that, and they were saying, it's not really our fight and all this kind of stuff. And I said, you do realize that Iran has been killing Americans directly and indirectly through their proxies for a long time. And they said, well, give me an example. And I gave them the example of the barracks where they killed our people, our Marines and all that. And he had no idea of this. And this is a guy in his 30s.
That's why we're here to educate people.
And it's amazing how few people seem to know that we've in a way been at war, as far as killing our soldiers and our people for 50 years, basically.
Yeah, they really have. And then you think of that Salman Rushdie that wrote the book that was anti-Muhammad. They said it was blasphemy. They put out a death threat, and they've tried to kill that guy multiple times, and that was back in the 80s or 90s. They don't give up. I mean, I forget the name that they use, but it's like a written law. It's like a caliphate for an individual that they have to carry this out, and they will do whatever they can to do this. And we don't want to talk about regime change, but we hope the Iranian people raise up at this time and take advantage of the opportunity that's been created by Israel and the United States, and let's bring peace to that area. They were a strong democratic country before it got taken over by the Ayatollahs.
Absolutely. Well, the U.S. is trying to play catch up now, protecting our military bases around the globe and defend, as you said earlier, about drone strikes like Ukraine used against us. So my question is one comment before the question. Thank God Israel degraded a lot of their proxies before this, because that has really hamstrung them. Like Hezbollah, for instance, is now being somewhat controlled by Lebanon, which they weren't before. Their leader, literally the Hezbollah leader, was speaking the other day with a Lebanese flag behind them. So they're being curtailed a little bit and cautious. So thank God that Israel was able to do that. But are we prepared for potential attacks on our bases? How prepared do you think we are?
You know, I would love to be able to answer that question. I can only think that the American military and intelligence service have prepared for this, and I hope they didn't wait until Ukraine did what they did to Russia and blew up all those airplanes by using inexpensive drones in a sneak attack. We are so vulnerable with the access we have, and if you go back when we saw people from China flying drones around our military bases out in California, in the Midwest, and on the East Coast. And you saw all those drones that were happening over New Jersey back a couple months ago. Where did all that go? Whatever happened?
We've still not really gotten an
explanation. And then we had the weather
that.
balloon come over from China that, Biden did absolutely nothing as it traversed all of the United States, and they didn't do anything until it got out into the Atlantic Ocean. And, how much did they surveil so that they can program their aerial drones and arm them and just send those out in mass? This is something that hopefully we can prevent. And I think what we ought to do is get a bunch of rednecks from the South with shotguns and have open season on drones.
Well, I said if they perfect that thing with like Amazon was experimenting with drone deliveries and stuff, I said that ain't going to fly over Texas, because it'll be a whole different kind of hunt. There's one now. It'll be a whole different turkey
I'm going to mount that
shoot.
one and put it on my wall.
Absolutely. But, I want to ask you a little bit, because of certainly your experience being in Congress, how this is going to affect domestic politics, because the Democrats are obviously, some have come out supportive of what's happening, but many have come out against it and using it. And there are even representatives, Republican representatives, like Thomas Massey out of Kentucky, where I don't know if you saw
Warren
this,
Davison.
but Donald Trump came out and said that he'd go campaign against Massey in Kentucky. I don't know if I agree with that, but he did say that, and he's raising money to do it. So how do you see this impacting domestically, like the Big Beautiful Bill? Well, this is supposed to have been Big Beautiful Bill week, basically.
Yeah, well, it
but
got kind of sidelined.
It's probably sidelined. So how do you see all of this playing out politically in Washington right now?
You're going to have these debates, and my former colleague from New York was railing against Donald Trump, and he had no authority to do this. Well, excuse you, he does. It's called the War Powers Act. He can act unilaterally on his own through the executive branch, but he has to come to Congress within 60 days to justify what he had done. And I think the argument that we just had, that they've been wanting death to America and Israel for 50 years, they have enriched uranium to 90%, and for peaceful electricity, you only need it to, at the max, 20%. And they were working on ICBMs. And President Eisenhower, he said this so well: if people are enriching uranium for peaceful purposes, it's out in the open. But if they're doing it for nuclear weapons, it's covert. And that's what Fort Dow was. It was underground, a long way underground, hundreds of feet underground. And the Atomic Energy Commission, International Atomic Energy Agency, couldn't inspect there. With the JCPOA, the thing that John Kerry and Obama did, that agreement that was supposed to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, said the IAEA could inspect wherever they wanted to. But Iran says you can inspect anywhere over here, but you can't go where we don't want you to go. And so it was a joke. The whole thing was.
And you mentioned it earlier, but I don't want people to miss the point of that agreement that you were just talking about. Not only allowed them to eventually get a nuclear bomb, but it did nothing on their missile program, which is the most immediate threat to our interest in that area, even today.
So going back to your question, how's this going to affect Congress? There's going to be these arguments up there. There's going to be these discussions. There's going to be a lot of fanfare and people getting their viral moment. But hopefully they'll come together, stand behind the president. This is not a time to be divided as Americans. This is the time to come together, say the decision was made, right or wrong, whether you agree with it or not. We need to move forward to protect, the homeland and our allies.
Yeah, well, we're going to take a brief commercial break and come back and kind of pick this up and talk a little bit about some of the European reaction to all of this. We hope you'll be a sponsor of the show, and if you'd like to be one, look at the tagline that says Contact Freddie and call that number and support our sponsors. Like what we do, share it far and wide. We certainly depend on your support in any way possible.
And we appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll be right back.
Although the owner of Lewis Oil Company maintains she is 29, Lewis Oil turns 60 years old in June. Chevron would like to recognize the North Florida second-generation family-owned business, celebrating its growth and staying power. Lewis Oil Company maintains significant on-hand supplies, strategically located fuel depots, a delivery fleet, on-site service, fuel card locks, and convenience stores. Lewis Oil Company understands its responsibility in the local economy by providing service and delivery on demand and in crisis. As a first responder for 18 Florida counties and the Southeast from Texas to Virginia, we are proud of this rare accomplishment. Lewis Oil delivers.
This is Ward Scott, and I want to thank all our sponsors who keep the show going and pay the bills. The Ward Scott Files premium sponsors are Crime Prevention Security Systems, large enough to serve you, small enough to care.
Meldon Law, the only official injury partner of the Florida Gators.
The Ward Scott Files Gold sponsors are Lewis Oil Company,
Shoot GTR,
On the Spot Dry Cleaners, R&R Construction, and Style Cuts. If you are interested in promoting your business on the show, you can visit our website, www.wardscottfiles.com, and click on the Advertise Here banner on the right side of the page, or call my friend Freddie at 352-284-3733. Again, thank you to all the great businesses that support the Ward Scott Files. And remember, if you like the show, thank our sponsors and support the businesses that support us.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. May God have mercy on your soul.
Ward, that very much surprises me that you've never been tased.
You can't handle the truth!
All bees poop.
A warthog. He's going to come up the steps. Here he comes. Oh my goodness, and he's huge. Hello, boy. Wonder if we can pet him. Hi, boy.
Can we touch him? No, don't.
Help me! Help! Help!
Welcome back to the 3 Ps, our political pirate podcast with yours truly, the old salty dog, John Martin, and the captain of our ship, Ted Yoho. Well, Ted, when we went to break, we were talking about the events over the weekend, the bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities. And I want to get in a little bit about what other countries, including like Europe and all, are thinking about this. Obviously, China has made some statements. Russia has said, as we said earlier, about potentially giving them nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia is an interesting case because they've said some things negative, but I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, pardon the pun, to know that they're actually glad that Iran is being hit, because it may destabilize the area somewhat, but Iran, if Israel and the United States are first on the list, Saudi Arabia is certainly second.
Right. Yeah, because Saudi Arabia doesn't look at being a part of the regime like Iran is. They're a Muslim faith. They're Arabs, though. They don't look at themselves as like Iran does, or Iraq, or Afghanistan, and so there's a little bit of distance between the two. But when a conflict comes down, and I think you'll see this. In fact, our former President Obama said if there is a conflict between the West and the Muslim world, I've got to side with my Muslim Brotherhood. And that was in his book, Dreams of My Father. And I think that lays deep throughout that culture. And that's why Saudi Arabia came out, and they weren't supportive of this at all. They were very tight-lipped about it. But it just said, we don't need to go down this path anymore. We need to bring this to a resolution and get to diplomacy. Well, diplomacy didn't work, and it's like the JCPOA, that Iranian or the nuclear deal with Iran. They'll tell you things they're going to do, but they don't do it. And, this is what happens as you follow through. And if you think about that, that deal was in 2015. The nuclear limitation agreement with Iran and the United States and other countries. And here we are 10 years later. They've enriched to 90%, and it's not for peaceful electrification.
For peaceful purposes.
Yeah.
Well, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and North Korea both are all the combined are saying that the U.S. did was very, in your words, Ted, provocative,
right,
and goes against the UN Security Council's rule.
Yeah, I found that very interesting.
Yeah, well, go ahead and comment on it, because you say it's pretty hypocritical of Russia to say that.
Yeah, Russia and China and Iran are on the Security Council and the Human Rights Council.
That's a joke in and of itself.
That's a joke of itself.
Sad one.
And I may mistaken about Iran being on the National Security Council, but Russia and China definitely are, and they're saying how this goes against what the UN Security Council rules are of international dealings with other countries. Yet Russia attacked Ukraine, which was against the UN Security Council. So it's okay if they do it. China does this all the time. They go against the neighbors in the South China Sea, and they intimidate these people. They're making claims to the Arctic Ocean as a near Arctic Ocean nation, and that goes against the United Nations Security Council. And then they rape reefs. They're dredging off of the Galapagos Islands, mining for rare earth minerals. And so for these countries to come out and say that, it's very hypocritical. And they should come together to help prevent Iran from doing any further damage. And I hope they do that. That would be the best thing to do, and that's diplomacy.
Well, to kind of wrap this story up, and of course, I'm sure there'll be plenty more to talk about it in the coming days or hours even. But to me, everybody's wondering what's going to happen next, of course. And I'm not saying I know by any stretch, but I do think a lot of it will depend, Ted, on what actually happens in Iran. And by that, I mean, what do they, if the mullahs stay in charge, the Ayatollah, what do they decide to do? Do they decide to go for broke and all this kind of stuff? Or do they say, well, our heads are on the chopping block? Because it's one thing to send somebody else's son out to do a suicide bombing.
Right.
It's another to put your head on the block.
Right.
So how do they feel about that? And then the underlying thing, and we always talk about it, but it never quite seems to happen, is what will the Iranian people, what are they capable of doing? What will they do internally? So a lot could happen right there in the next week or so that will dramatically affect the outcome of this.
It will. And the Iranian people that I met with when I was in Congress and since, they love liberty and freedom just like we do. They want a better life for their kids, a better future for their kids, and they want the same things we do. The mullahs that are in charge are very theocratical, and they want to push strict Sharia law, which is not something most of the world doesn't want. And so what you're going to see is, what I see is the world's dividing in those two different systems now. One is you're going to have authoritarian, whether it's Sharia law or the Chinese Communist Party or somebody like Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro or Putin. And then you're going to have the liberal democracies of Western civilization or countries that have liberal democracies like Japan and North Korea or South Korea. And so you're dividing this way. And then you look at the countries, the Baltic countries, that are lining up and how much money Germany is putting into national defense. And all those countries are agreeing to do that. And the countries that border Russia, they're pulled out of the land mining treaty that said they wouldn't use landmine. They pulled out of that and they're land mining their borders. So the world is separating, preparing for war. And we just hope that diplomacy can work its magic and that we get away from war and we focus on those things that people really want. And we want the liberty and freedom and free trade.
Yeah, it is amazing how, and I'm hoping it doesn't turn out this way, but when you look at what's happening in the world, you got a combination of World War I and World War II. Because in World War I, you had all these little skirmishes everywhere, and that kind of was a tinderbox. But then in World War II, you had the Axis powers separating. And so now we have all these brush fires literally everywhere, and we have an Axis forming, which is kind of a combination of the two scenarios that created the world wars. And that's a pretty scary thought. But let's get a little bit into what's happening in Europe and the Ukraine, because I don't know if you saw this or not, Ted, but over the weekend, Vladimir Putin was at an economic forum of some sort and literally said that as far as which surprised me a bit, but wherever Russian boots are belongs to Russia.
Right.
And he was talking about the Ukraine belonging to Russia. Wherever Russian boots are belongs to Russia. And that's got to terrify especially the former Soviet bloc.
It really does, because, I mean, that goes through the Eastern Bloc that fell with the fall of the Iron Curtain. And, you know, the world is going through what I like to refer to as a tectonic shift in world powers. You know, we're being challenged. There's a principle called Thucydides' principle. When you have a reigning power that starts to decline and you have another one that's starting to rise, war is inevitable. And then you look at the things that were precipitated World War I and World War II, there was always the economics that got involved too. Countries were strapped economically and they were putting, you know, they just got into a position where they're untenable. And that's what happened with the Weimar Republic of Germany. You know, they were printing money so fast it lost its value. And, you know, we could say that same thing for us.
You said you needed a wheelbarrow load of money to buy
a loaf of bread. And they got to where they're only printing one side of the money. Because it was changing so fast. But so we're going through that tectonic shift in world powers, and people are lining up, you know, this side versus that side. And this is something I hope we never see in our lifetime. We've seen enough wars with, you know, I grew up, you know, at the end of the Korean War was ending right when I was born. And then we had, you know, of course, Vietnam. Then we had, you know, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Desert Storm, Grenada. We had all these conflicts. Conflicts don't solve the problems. It's what happens after that. And if we can prevent that ahead of time, I think everybody's a lot better off.
Yeah, an interesting thing is happening in Europe right now that when Biden was when he was the president, basically they talked a lot of talk, but they relied totally on America to pay the price, the money,
right.
That type of thing. Europe was kind of on the sidelines, mostly just talking. But now that Trump is in there, the Europeans are now stepping up their game, and what they're talking about literally is forming these alliances. Really not, I mean, NATO is one thing, but they got countries that aren't necessarily even in NATO now that are talking about doing direct military types of intervention in Ukraine.
They really are. I mean, like you just brought it up. You know, when you see Norway, Lithuania, Sweden, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and the other countries in that area, you got Germany, the UK, France, when they're all eyeing that we have to do something to prevent Russia from expanding any further. And as you said, Putin said, wherever Russian boot is, that's our territory. You know, there's no way of stopping him once he starts on that march. And this is where I think President Trump did a misstep when he berated Zelensky in the Oval Office and said, "You caused the war. You know, you should apologize. It was your fault that you're in war." You know, I think that emboldened Putin, and Putin has moved forward. And of course, Trump said he and Vladimir had a great relationship, and they were going to get a peace negotiation. And you know, everybody got so excited with the critical mineral mining agreement that Trump made with Ukraine. It'll be for naught if Russia keeps marching, because he's not going to honor it. And so we have to stand in strength with our European allies on Russia. And now we've got to worry about Iran. And then you never know what North Korea is going to do. I mean, here you've got a country that's a hermit kingdom, they always say. And they've already sent 12,000 troops to Russia. 6,000 of them have been estimated to have been killed. And so they're sending another 6,000, of which 1,000 are what they call sappers, which are really snipers. And the other 5,000 are construction workers to rebuild the areas that Russia blew up in Ukraine that they're going to claim.
Yeah, and you know, we're rightfully focused on the Middle East and in Ukraine and that part of Europe. But there are things happening all over the place right now. I mean, right here in our own backyard, Venezuela is literally collapsing. I just heard a fascinating story on the way in that in Colombia right now, there are citizen groups that are being pushed by the old guerrilla groups that disarm, that are actually capturing Colombian soldiers and holding them for ransom.
Yeah, that's what they did.
Well, they're doing it right now.
Right.
There's 2 separate platoons, about 200 soldiers in various places that are being held in the interior of Colombia right now.
Well, that's not surprising, because the president of Colombia, and I don't remember his name right now, he was a member of the FARC, which was their terrorist groups that were fighting against the Colombian government, and they were siding up with the drug cartels. You know, they're a communist organization, and they have taken over Colombia. And what you're seeing is a drop in the rule of law, and it's backsliding bad. And of course, they're offering support for Venezuela, which I wouldn't want their support. But see, this is going on all around the world. And this is where foreign policy, again, is so important, because if we lose our influence, China steps in, these communist organizations step in, and they're in our own backyards. China, Iran, Russia are in Cuba. And, you know, my question to you is, what happens to Haiti? Haiti is a failed state. It's been a failed state all of my life. And, you know, how long before Russia or China decides to go into Haiti, which is 90 or 1,000 miles, 900 to 1,000 miles from Florida, they would have a deep water port right there. I mean, those things are unacceptable, and this is really what Congress needs to be focused on. There needs to be a good game plan here, and just say, no, you're not going to do that. And I think we need to intervene in Haiti with a group of other nations that want to form a stable government there.
Yeah, it's a scary thought, and I agree with you. I mean, while you were talking about it, I thought about Haiti in some ways from a satellite view, going back to like North-South Korea.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of our version of that in our hemisphere, because you got Dominican Republic on one side that is lush and green and forested, and then the other side of the island, which is where Haiti is a barren wasteland.
Oh, it's a war zone. You know, we had a guy come in our office here in Gainesville. He's a pharmacy student here at the University of Florida, and I asked him, how many people have potable water, drinkable water in Haiti? He goes, less than 18%. I had ambassadors come into my office in D.C., asked them the same thing. They said, less than 18%. This is the 21st century in the Western Hemisphere. We know how to get water. Clinton raised $1 billion to fix that infrastructure, and they don't have potable water. And it happens because there's not the rule of law. There's not a stable government. And I think if we don't intervene in there, somebody else will, and we're not going to like it. I brought that up to John Bolton. He goes, you're talking about colonization. He goes, we can't do that. And I'm like, well, you know, let somebody else go in there and colonize it then.
Yeah, I was thinking about, you were talking about, I know quite a few Haitians that are pretty successful over here, and they all have the same thing. They say, I love it. I wish it would be right, but I'm never going back. And then you saw that guy that got picked up in the ICE raid in, I think, Chicago a couple months ago, who was had a felony record a mile long, and he's hollering out of the thing, "I'm not going back. I'm not going back." So
well, you know, it's interesting.
It's just amazing.
Carolyn and I were in an Uber in D.C., and the driver was from Haiti. And so we started talking about Haiti. He goes, "Oh, man, it's terrible." He goes, "That's why I'm here." He goes, "I don't want to go back there." And I says, "What would it take to fix Haiti?" I said, "What if the United States came in and said, we're going to take it over for 10 years, help you stabilize it, and leave it over, turn it over?" He goes, "The people of Haiti would love that." And I think there needs to be bold move there because it's in our hemisphere. And if we're not the ones dictating, I don't want to say dictate, if we're not the one encouraging them to change and become a liberal democracy, not even that, but just to raise up and have rule of law that matches what they want in that country, China will be there dictating to them. And then we have to deal with that.
The biggest problem with that, though, is because in various forms, and I'm not saying it's been well done, but in various forms, we've attempted to do some of that, but we can't find Haitian leaders that are thinking what's best for Haiti. They're thinking about what's best for them, because if there's any one place that's had some god-awful rulers that are notorious dictators and unmerciful to their enemies, it's been Haiti. We had the list is long.
The list is long, and it goes back a long time, 100 years.
Yeah, it's insane.
Let's move on.
Yeah, so I pray for Haiti for sure. But let's talk a little bit about some domestic things here, like the ICE raids that are happening. Lost in all the bombing of Iran. The news cycle has changed, but there's still riots in the streets. There's still these things. There's this debate that is beginning to brew that is really fascinating, that you have what I call the Chamber of Commerce people. I'm talking about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which I'm honestly not that big a fan of, but that's just me. You can advertise with us, though, by the way. But they're now pushing that we need more legal immigration, and they're not saying illegal immigration, but they're talking about legal immigration. We got to fix that. There's pressure on President Trump to keep certain types of workers here and all of that. And this thing, there's this overlying issue, Ted, that they're either Americans don't want to do it or we can't do it, whether it be the high-tech stuff. It's fascinating to me, Ted, because they're talking about we need people to literally, the Democrats, to wipe our behinds.
Yeah.
But
pick our cotton.
Right. But the
Jasmine Crockett
Republicans
said that.
The Republicans now, not all of them, but there are a group of Republicans that are talking about, well, we need immigration at the top side because of the technology. Both may be true, but what does that say about us as a people, that we're either not smart enough for the technology or willing to do whatever work needs to be done? It's just fascinating to me.
It's kind of like Dennis Rodman when he kind of fell down in the NBA and kind of lost his groove. They said, "What happened?" He goes, "I lost my funky comedina." Americans have lost their funky comedina.
He was hanging out with Madonna, probably. Yeah, but that's another story.
Well, it is, and you go back to our educational system. Number one, that's number one. Number two is people forget who we are as Americans. It's what's our responsibility as a citizen? Are we supposed to let the government take over and take care of us and tell us what to do? I don't think so. That's not how this country was formed. And when you get away from the basics in education and teaching civics and what this country stands for and what our responsibility is as a citizen, you move away from this stuff. But the Democrats, and we'll talk more about the socialists running in the mayor race in New York, they want to give people whatever they want to keep them where they're at, so they're good subjects, loyal subjects to the crown. And they talk about Trump being a king and a dictator. No, they're the ones that want subjects. They want to be like China. They want their people to serve government. In our constitutional republic, the role of the government is to serve the will of the people, and that's why it's we the people. We give that power to government to create laws that we're supposed to follow, but at some point in time, you have to challenge that. And I think the best way to do that is we started a movement nationwide to say, you know what, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, government, we're not going to pay our taxes. We're going to put them in an offshore account that you can't get into, and we'll let the money come out. I shouldn't say that. You may run you off the show, or you'll run me off the show. But, how do you get the government's attention to do what they're supposed to do?
Well, you don't have to worry about that, Ted, because I'm sitting here. Sometimes you trigger thoughts in my head, as you know. You're in my head, but
that's a scary thing. I feel bad for you.
You knew my old daddy pretty
sure
well, and I can just imagine me when I was a kid, with him assigning me some of the work that he did, me telling him, that's beneath me, Daddy.
You didn't tell him that, did
No, heck no.
You wouldn't be sitting here.
I can't imagine even thinking that way. I mean, I've literally shoveled cow manure and chicken. I mean, I can tell you stories. It's unbelievable. There was no work.
We might have to give you some ivermectin.
There was no work that Big Sid didn't think I should do.
I agree
whether
with
it
Big
be
Sid.
at the top or the bottom, man. And so it's just amazing how we've lost that.
You can't get to the top if you don't start at the bottom.
Yeah, it really fascinates me, and I know I'm repeating myself, but it's just so fascinating to me that we're saying on the one hand, you got a group of political figures saying that we have to have people come in because Americans can't do this work. They can, in other words, they can't do the AI. They can't do all this work. And then you got the other side saying, well, we need people to come in here illegally because we won't do this work.
That's why I'm glad you're here, because you brought me back to the subject I was supposed to be talking about.
It's unbelievable.
You're talking about the elites and the Chamber of Commerce. Very true. They want immigrants here. They don't care how they get them here. And this even goes to the Republican Party when Paul Ryan was there, because we had a good immigration bill, and Paul Ryan says we can't do that. We need the people here. Our birth rate's declining. We need to increase our birth rate. This is the wrong strategy. If you want immigrants here, do a good immigration bill. And I've got to tote the bill we had. We had the best immigration bill for agriculture. But as Washington works, people wanted to start adding all these little warts, and it got distracted, so nobody would support it. If we just stayed with the agriculture sector and used it for a model, it would have worked for construction, it would have worked for the hospitality industry, for the landscaping industry. And if we don't do this, well, before I say that, that's one of the reasons that we have become a net importer of agricultural products, is because we don't have a consistent immigration policy. And if we don't fix that, we aren't going to have that help. The AI, the people that are coming from Asia and India that are the programmers now that are out programming us, they can't come here. I mean, it's lunacy that a country like ours can't come up with a program. And the reason they can't is politics gets played.
Well, all you got to do, Ted, is look at Florida and think about it. It kind of represents in this fashion the country. In Florida now, we import fruit. We import fruit and we import fish. I mean, think about that.
That's
Florida.
crazy. Yeah.
And if you and I are old-time Floridians, if you know anything about Florida, the idea that we have to import agriculture and import fish into this state, let alone the rest of the country, who would have thought that? If you told somebody 30 years ago, let alone 50, that was going to happen, they would have told you've lost your mind.
They really would have. Then you look at what's going on in South America. Brazil produces 50 to 60% of the soybeans in the world. I mean, that was our handle. I mean, we did that. Same with wheat, cotton. I mean, that we used to be the largest producer of cotton. That's not true anymore. And as far as row crops and vegetables and things like that, we're backsliding. And you look at the citrus. Florida led the nation in citrus, in orange juice, grapefruit, and the list goes on. But because of a Chinese beetle that came in, and I have to think that China probably did this as bio-warfare or agro-warfare, and they caught those people bringing in that new fungus that'll attack our seed grains, our grain crops. These are things that I think retrospectively, when they go back and look, they'll say, you know what, China was this, and they were at war with us for a long time, under the table. We didn't know about it covertly.
And so people out in California who I know are listening, if you can relate to this, for us to import fruit and fish is like y'all having to import weed. I mean, it's just unbelievable that you would have to do
it. Really is when you think of Florida and the richness we have off our coast and with inland and the different tropical or the different temperate climates we have. You know, we can grow 3 crops in Florida, the same crop. You know, in the Midwest, you get 1 crop. And we've been blessed with that, but we're losing that.
Well, we got a few minutes left in the show, and I want to kind of touch base again on a story that we were talking about last Friday, and that's what's happening in the mayoral race in New York City, where God help people in New York and the United States, really, where the choice seems to be, there are other people running, but the choice, the most likely mayor of New York is either going to be Andrew Cuomo, the disgraced governor that put your grandma in the nursing home to die, or Zohran Mamdani, who has said that we need to globalize the infantada,
right,
which means basically kill all non-believers. One of those two is likely to be the next mayor of New York now.
That's unbelievable, isn't it?
The Empire State, the Empire City, the greatest city in
where
the
the
world.
Statue of Liberty is.
Right.
And Zohran Mamdani running against Mario Cuomo.
It's actually Andrew.
Oh, yeah. Andrew
Sorry.
Cuomo.
But it may not be a difference. Mario was the daddy, the governor.
Thanks for correcting that.
That's all right.
He's a Democrat socialist, which is a communist. I mean, there is no other word to say about that. And I want you to look at who's supporting him. He wants to bring, and he says this, I want to bring socialism to New York. And as we talked about, the guy that started the American Democratic Party, or he's the leader of it now, he didn't start it. He came out just real proudly said all communists are socialism until they achieve socialism, and then they turn into communists. And so he's saying that. This candidate says he wants to bring socialism to New York. And of course, who supports him is Bernie Sanders and his sidekick AOC have endorsed this guy. This primary is Tuesday. Pay attention because this is setting the groundwork of what is to come to America if we allow these things to happen. And the way you prevent them is show up at the polls, get educated, get motivated, and become activated. And if we do that, we can stave off this for our future generations. And this is really what this fight is about.
Well, Ted, you'll probably appreciate this. So one of my listeners from a previous show I used to have, she's a very loyal, Denise, you know who you are. You
Hello,
know I
Denise.
love you. She reminded me on Facebook of something that I once said, and it's right. It time on for this race in New York. And that was, you can vote yourself into socialism / communism, but you got to fight your way out.
That's very well said, Denise.
Yeah, I said it.
Oh,
she
you
just
said
repeated
it. Well.
to me that I said it. Yeah, you can. I'm gonna say that again. You can vote your way into socialism / communism, but you got to fight your way out of it. That's for sure.
Yeah, you know, and people talk about Trump, how he's so disruptive, he's a tyrant, he's a king, and all that. President Trump is but a symptom of the underlying cause of what's going on in this country, and we've seen this decay going on for decades. But it really started under the Clintons in my lifetime when I noticed it. And then with Obama coming in there, and of course the election of Biden, which should never have happened. But this country is on a downward path of a liberal democracy with freedom and liberty, something that we have to hang on to. And if we don't do this, like you said, socialism will come, communism will come, and we'll have to fight our way out of that.
Yeah, what's really going to be fascinating to watch to me in New York City, obviously who wins, it's a bad choice either way, but what's going to be the turnout? Because we keep hearing, you know, the Democrats are down and everything else, so it's a solid Democrat city. It'd be interesting to see what the turnout is, because I saw an interesting poll that just came out, and that 79% of Republicans polled said they were satisfied with the direction of the Republican Party.
Right.
But only like 7 to 9% of Democrats polled said they were satisfied with the direction of the Democratic Party. I'm not talking about individual leaders like President Trump's popularity. I'm talking about the party, satisfied with their party.
With the direction they're taking the country.
Less than 10% of the Democrats said they were satisfied with their party. That's going to be fascinating.
It will be interesting to see this race, because if Cuomo wins and this guy loses, Zoran Mamdani, if he loses and he loses big, this is a strong signal to the progressives. Get out of the country. We don't want you here. And I would venture to say that you'll see Bernie Sanders maybe thrown out of office. Of course, he's from Vermont. And then AOC, somebody's like, we're tired of that. We don't want that here. Because this Mamdani, running for the mayor of New York City, says he wants free transportation for people. He wants rent not to go up anymore. Well, if you're a landlord and you own property, you've got to increase your rent because guess what? Your taxes go up, your insurance goes up, your maintenance goes up, and it's just not going to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed the show as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go to we're getting ready to do a new Facebook site and a new website.
It's exciting. We're looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So like what we're doing, share what we're doing far and wide, spread the word so you can help us educate, motivate, and activate people. And Ted, I'll give you the last word.
No, I think that's well said. And, as we move through these next few days, it's going to be interesting, and keep our nation and the leaders in your thoughts and prayers. I mean, we all need to support what America is doing, what this administration's doing. It could be done differently, maybe a little bit nicer. I don't know, but it's being done, and that's the important thing because at the end of this, as the dust settles, America will be better off and be more focused on where we're going.
What he said. Peace out.
Take care. Thank you, John. Good seeing you.
You too.